to any of the content discussed, as there is quite a lot of information on some of the slides. They will be able to refer back to that with ease. So a real roundabout, we're going through the kind of housekeeping side of things, and then the first session will be run by me for around 25 minutes until 12. We'll have a short break in between that, and then the session led by Mark, which will be I'm really looking forward to that, till about 12:35, and then there'll be a wider kind of discussion and Q&A piece and session for the last half of the event. So I think first and foremost, I think the most important thing to really outline is why we're here and why this event is really taking place. As I said, July is Disability Pride Month, but I know for some people it might not be that they're fully aware of what Disability Pride Month is. So for the disabled community, this month really encourages self-acceptance and embracing all disabilities, and it really represents a chance to celebrate the disabled community. However, alongside this kind of celebration, it's also a really good opportunity to have further conversations about disability experience and the issues they might face as well. And I think that's why I kind of put this event into place, because I think there's a lot we can do within our own capacity on the NGDP to really consider inclusion and disability within our own placement councils, but we'll kind of touch on to that a bit later on down the line. I'm running a little bit over, but I'll kind of go over a quick kind of overview about the range of disabilities that people can have as well, because I think there's sometimes it's not always acknowledged or understood. So there's a whole range of different ways that disabilities can take place. So physical impairments, which refers to a limitation on a person's physical functioning, mobility, dexterity, or stamina. These are often very highly individualized from person to person, and there usually are two main types in terms of musculoskeletal disability or neuromuscular disability. Then another type of disability would be a developmental disability, which is obviously more of an umbrella term in regards to, and it kind of includes people with intellectual and physical disabilities. And some key kind of examples of this would be autism, cerebral palsy, Spina-Bifida, and Angelman syndrome as well. Angelman syndrome, sorry. And then you have intellectual disabilities, which is again a subset of these developmental disabilities, which is often characterized by the limited reasoning, learning and problem solving, but also some issues around communication skills. So these would include conditions such as Fragile X syndrome, Down syndrome, Prader-Willi syndrome, and also fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. Vision impairments or visual impairments is where a person would have a vision loss that would impede their ability to see, and this is something that wouldn't get better with the use of glasses or surgery. So basically it's a long-term kind of impairment to their overall sight. This is again with hearing impairments is where part of the hearing process is affected, which is usually coming from a genetic cause or a complication at birth, or even sort of chronic ear infections or use of particular drugs, including kind of excessive noise and aging as well. The main ones to note in terms of hearing impairments would be sensorineural hearing impairment, which is kind of one of the most common, which involves the inner ear and the hearing nerve. And then there's conductive hearing impairment, which is more about the external and the middle ear, which doesn't always result in complete deafness, but it's still an overall impairment to how a person can process, sound. But the one important thing to note this is around invisible disabilities. It's not always something that is apparent that a person has something that is that limits their physical, psychological, social functioning. But people could have an invisible disability that could give massive amounts of pain, fatigue, or dizziness, or difficulty in processing language or learning, but also mental health disorders, but also how you see it and hear, or just even generally perceive the world in general. So I think that's really something we need to consider going as we go forwards, in terms of there are conditions that we are not able to pinpoint just by looking at surface level, and that's something to really consider as we go throughout this. And then finally, it's psychological disabilities. So in terms of a psychological disorder, emotional or mental illness, this would actually impair the educational, social, or vocational functioning of that individual. And obviously, although some people experience some degree of instability in their kind of thoughts or feelings from time to time, these psychological disabilities often inhibit a person's relationship, their occupation, their health, their learning, self-care, and legal matters. So I hope that kind of gives you a good idea of the real breadth of conditions that really kind of fall under disabilities, and that's something that we need to bear in mind as we go forward, because there is such a wide range of things that can impair a person's ability, and that's kind of where we kind of start off. So I think there's now to move on to the first session, which will be led by me. And I really would like to thank you all for joining me as we kind of here to celebrate diversity and to discuss a very crucial topic that often remains overlooked, and that is the inclusion and support of individuals with disability. And it really is quite an honour to stand before you as the chair of the Disability Inclusion Network. As I said, we're quite a new network, but I feel like we're already making very good progress in championing and moving things forwards in a good direction. So we live in a world where disabilities come in various forms, and each are unique and with its own set of challenges. And many individuals like myself have faced hardships and doubts navigating a world that sometimes fails to understand or accommodate our needs. And I would like to kind of share my personal story and my personal journey of navigating disability. And I think this really underscores the importance of what we're discussing throughout this event in general. So growing up isn't easy, and growing up with disabilities really was a whole different ball game. From a very young age, from around 3 to 4 years old, there was always something wrong with me. I really struggled to express myself. I really struggled with complex speech and even kind of forming full sentences. Even up until I started reception, I had people who were my peers who were unable to understand me because I wasn't always able to formulate full coherent words or sentences. However, the moment I kind of did start to get the hang of it, as my mum puts it, you really couldn't shut me up. So the moment I was able to actually properly sort of start forming full sentences, I didn't really stop, as you can probably tell. But as I think it's a good indication of when I first started school, I was already a few steps behind my peers in terms of development, and I've always had some struggles with reading and writing. And I wouldn't be what you'd exactly call a model student. I often struggled with distractions and often created disruptions. And one of those kind of biggest challenges for me in class anyway was shouting out. A lot of my school reports always read, he's a bright child, but he doesn't always apply himself and he always shouts out in class. And these kind of outbursts and disruptive behavior, got me labeled as a disruptive student and a troublemaker. Although my teachers did note that these disruptions and me shouting out in class would be a lot worse if I wasn't always shouting out the right answer. I think the thing looking back, what was going on was that half the time I didn't really know what was going on in class. So the moment that I actually knew the answer, I think the excitement overtook me, and I just blurted it out because I was like, oh my God, I actually know this. So that's just something to I think that's kind of where that really came from. But after some time, this disruptive behavior kind of became a bit more of an issue, and I underwent some assessments, which led to me being diagnosed with something called DAMP syndrome, which stands for deficits in attention, motor control, and perception. And my parents really hoped that this diagnosis would lead to the support I needed to really thrive. But unfortunately, with the nature of DAMP, my teacher was very unfamiliar about it, and there's very limited information that was available about the condition. There was just nothing that, you couldn't just go onto Google and find it. There was no information about it. So this kind of extra help that I needed to be able to thrive wasn't really provided. However, later I came to realize that this condition, DAMP, is really not really used as a diagnosable condition in the UK anymore. And this is largely because there's a massive overlap with other conditions, and this often leads to a misdiagnosis. But we'll touch on to that a bit later. So after finishing primary school, transitioning into secondary school brought a real mix of hope, but also some very harsh realities. Attending an all boys school was a entirely different experience, and being a slightly nerdy kid who played the clarinet and didn't really like football at the time, although now I love it, but I did become prime bullying material. Um, from my first term at secondary school, I did endure relentless bullying. I remember running from classroom to classroom during breaks to kind of escape being chased and attacked by older boys. And the friends I had made from my junior school actually quickly distanced themselves from me because they feared the consequences of being associated with a bullied kid. And obviously, as someone who struggled to make friends at that time, this was a real devastating blow. This bullying really kind of reached a peak kind of at towards the end of year 7 and the kind of middle of year 8, where I had a whole group of about, I don't know, like more close to 10 year 10s chasing me and attacking me on the school field, which led to me being knocked unconscious and also had some concussion. And then later on in year 8, I actually had a situation where an older boy in year 11 followed me back from school and threatened me with a knife, basically because I was that different and that strange and I was an easy target. This eventually led to my head of year having a meeting with myself and my mum, and they basically had to admit that they couldn't guarantee my safety if I stayed at the school. And ultimately, my parents and I think the school really came to agreement that it would be better for me to leave the school and that's rather than kind of endure that constant abuse from my fellow pupils. So after that, and once I kind of left the school, I moved to a school that was meant to be very good with pupils who had various disabilities. The head teacher was a world-renowned psychologist, or child psychologist at the time, and at the time it seemed like a very good option for me where I could get that level of support I needed. However, looking back, I don't know if I could have thought of a worse place to send me. Because although I didn't receive much physical abuse from pupils, the verbal and emotional abuse I received at school was really kind of second to none. And what's worse is that the teachers at the school who were supposedly used to managing pupils with disabilities were anything but understanding. I had my English teacher get in contact with my mum to complain that my handwriting was illegible and that at this rate she couldn't see me even getting a D in English. And what's worse, 2 weeks before my GCSE exams, our supposed child psychology expert of a head teacher pulled me and my mum into the office and said, "Quite frankly, Mrs. Bolton, I think your son is mentally incapable of even getting one GCSE." So, but despite all of this, I was determined to prove them all wrong. And I've had people doubt me every single step of the way, and I now no longer let it get to me. And for those who want to know, I ended up leaving school with 9 GCSEs. I ended up getting an A in English, which was actually the highest mark in my English class, my English set. And needless to say, once I actually on results day, my head teacher and English teacher were pretty much gobsmacked, to be honest. And I thought they were assuming I was going to be staying there till the ends of time. And I thought I'd really want to emphasize, obviously that's a good transition, but I want to emphasize the gravity of this kind of discussion by showing quite a in-depth kind of section about that really underscores the critical need and understanding for compassion and for people with disabilities. However, because of the distressing nature about what I'm about to talk about, I really wanted to give a trigger warning because it is quite distressing. So if anyone wants to mute or tune out for a second, I'll just recommend that you kind of do that now. It's only the one slide, so once I change slides after the next, then you can come back on. So during my time in secondary school, from the ages of 12 to 17, my mental health really spiraled. I came to hate myself for being different from all the other kids. I often felt like I was on the outside looking in, and I couldn't really understand why I couldn't do things that everyone else seemed to do with ease. And quite honestly, I felt like I was a mistake and that I didn't deserve to exist, that I was broken. And it's really hard to believe now, but I was only age 13 when I tried to take my own life. I remember getting back from school after a horrendous day of bullying and abuse and coming home to an empty house. Both my parents worked late at the time, and in that moment, I think something inside me just snapped. And I don't want to go into too much details, but let's just say that what happened next involved a length of rope and the old apple tree at the bottom of the garden. And I'm lucky enough that the branch of the tree actually snapped. But unfortunately, if I wish I could say that this was the first and only time that I tried to do something like that. But unfortunately, kind of within that time frame between probably 12 to 18, I've made around 5 attempts in my life. And quite frankly, I'm extremely lucky to be talking to you all today, as some of those moments were incredibly close shaves. And I know kind of sharing part of this part of my journey is quite morbid and dark, but I think it's really crucial to highlight this because it highlights the emotional turmoil that disabled and neurodivergent people face on a quite regular basis. And this is especially without the correct or adequate support systems in place. That feeling of not belonging or being so drastically different from everyone else that they aren't worthy of the same treatment is a really grim reality that we need to acknowledge. And I think it's really vital to note that I am one of the very lucky few who actually managed to get that right level of support they needed later in life. But I'm very aware of the fact that there are plenty of people across the country that aren't able to get that level of support. And just for people to know, I have put links to mental health support sites on screen. If people have anything or they want to liaise with me to talk about anything like that, I'm open ears. But there's a lot of good resources out there and are on screen as well. So once I share slides after the event, you should be able to access them as well. So moving on from the really dark stuff, because when I started college, everything for me really started to change. Um, so the college I went to had really high expectations in terms of grades. And basically after the first term, my predicted grades were C, D, E, F, basically nowhere near good enough. And following this and a few discussions with my teachers, I was put into contact with my college's mental health department, and they started to run tests just to see if there was anything going on. So I did a few tests, and they first showed that I had dyspraxia and dyslexia, and then they kind of started to look a bit deeper as that there's often an overlap with those sort of conditions. So this kind of further investigation actually led to my actual diagnosis, which is ASD, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and also compounding depression and anxiety disorders. So these obviously are a range of different symptoms that impact the way I kind of navigate my day-to-day life, and this overlap is often quite common, which we'll kind of talk upon a bit later. But for me, this was what I really called the light bulb moment. It was honestly transformative for me. I suddenly had something that was concrete to understand and to work with, and I kind of finally knew what I had, who I was, and I also the fact was there was just so much research and information that I could access about it. Unlike the last 12 years of DAMP, where there was just something written in like Norwegian, it was so much more. It was just so much more clarity, and all of a sudden it just made so much sense. um, and also the medication. So I've been taking medication now for around 8 years, and it's made a really significant difference. I became much more focused, engaged, and interested in learning, and I could actually retain information. And it wasn't that I could actually just meet people academically; I could actually excel academically. And I came to realize that it wasn't that I couldn't learn or that I was stupid. It was generally because I had a chemical imbalance within me that made it so much more difficult for me to actually retain and process this information, and it was just so exhausting for me. And I think this really shows because my initial predicted grades of C, D, E, F were ultimately replaced with A star, B, C. And then when I managed to leave college, I managed to get into the University of Leeds, which was something that the Kieran from 2 years ago just wouldn't believe. I obviously thought I was probably going to be working on a building site or wouldn't be here. So the fact I managed to get into a university was honestly life changing. And luckily, my time at university was one of the best 3 years of my life. I made some incredible friends, and I left with a 2-1. And of course, there were some blips here and there, but by comparing where I was mentally and emotionally a few years before, it was quite frankly a complete 180 in terms of where I was. However, once I graduated university, I came to realize that the lack of support for individuals with disabilities was not limited to my school years. Obviously, starting a new job or a new role can be daunting for anyone. However, for those with disabilities, it can be even more of an overwhelming experience. The lack of support and understanding in the workplace is a reality that many disabled individuals face on a daily basis. And I think this is shown through a recent study by City and Guilds, which reveals some very distressing numbers, which is out of 850 organizations surveyed, a staggering 75% disabled employees reported struggling to maintain full-time employment, and with over 50% of those people stating encountered discrimination due to their disabilities. And quite frankly, this is just unacceptable. And as you can see from some of the statistics on screen, that neurodivergent people like myself are struggling to be open about their disabilities in the workplace. And from first-hand experience, masking your disability 24/7 is absolutely exhausting. So the fact that 72% of neurodivergent people in the workplace don't mention that they have this disability because they're worried about the impact it has on their career, or that the lack of knowledge from employers to actually support these people is what's holding people back, is crazy. And I think it's also important to note the employment gap as well, that the disability employment rate is 7.2% compared to the 3.2%. So that's now at its widest point since 2018. So that is a huge untapped talent pool of people who are being basically not allowed to access the work market and being given the same opportunities to live a normal life as any other person. But unfortunately, these statistics do not surprise me. Many disabled individuals face challenges in education and employment due to misconceptions and stereotypes. And even personally, in one of my early jobs out of university, I have faced derogatory labels such as Rain Man and Spaz. And this really highlights the misconceptions and stereotypes that still persist in the workplace. And I could have very easily let this devastating comment sort of shatter my dreams and my self-confidence. But to be quite honest, it only really fueled my determination to prove them wrong. And I knew that one of the main ways that we can improve the lived experience of disabled people is by people with that lived experience helping to contribute to the policies and decision making in this area. And that's really a large reason why I wanted to work in politics or government or the public sector. My passion for this kind of really ignited for it around college, around my diagnosis. And basically since then, I've been kind of hyper focused on working in this sector and kind of driving change, because I really want to improve the livelihoods of the public, and I wanted to feel like I was making a real difference. And even now, I've got a long-term ambition to stand and win as an MP in my home city of Birmingham, in order to kind of not only help people who are struggling day by day, but also become a voice and an advocate for disability inclusion in public discourse, as it's an often very neglected area of public discourse, and often fails to present people with disabilities in a particularly good light. But also more of a kind of personal point, I wanted to, this is kind of ambition of mine, just to prove to myself, but also to other people, that I'm just as capable as anybody else. And it's in fact the systems and processes in place that limit people's capacity or ability to actually progress and step forward in that. Obviously, this is a pipe dream. I might not never achieve it, but I think that's in my capacity, that's where I want to take things forwards, because things need to change drastically. And yeah, to be an advocate for this, that is really where I'd want to go forwards with that. But in my journey to trying to achieve this ambition, I'm still facing various hurdles. So, for example, I actually applied for the NGDP 4 years or 4 times in a row before I even made it past the first stage. Luckily, the first time I made it past the first stage, I got through, and here I am. But I think this is a very good way to indicate that disabled individuals often have to jump through a lot more hoops, or have to come through a lot more challenges than their non-disabled peers to even reach the same level of success and achievement. In addition to that, since starting on the NGDP, I've experienced such a heightened level of exhaustion due to the demands of the roles. So tasks such as writing board papers, deciphering the complex, like political jargon that is always bandied around, the multiple responsibilities and deadlines you have to juggle simultaneously, but also the expectations you have in terms of conversation with specific stakeholders or specific groups, or just in general meetings, is really challenging. And it's taken a lot of learning for me to get to that, but it caused me a lot of burnout and a lot of exhaustion. And that's kind of why, when I started looking for an NGDP disability network and I couldn't find one, I knew I had to do something. So I started one up because I realized that we needed a supportive and inclusive environment for individuals with disabilities. And we needed to ensure that they were valued and also given the same opportunities to thrive, or given enough opportunities to be able to thrive and progress further and get that level of support. And again, this is where it really comes down to all of us on the NGDP. If we're really supposed to be these new leaders of the public sector, then it's our responsibility to challenge the misconceptions surrounding disabilities and wider prejudice. And that's in order to create a workplace and society that celebrates diversity in all its forms. And as you've heard, my journey to overcome these challenges and barriers really was not easy. And I've experienced and I continue to battle through multiple mental health crises, facing feelings of isolation and struggling to adapt to the expectations of society. And throughout this journey, I've come to learn that disabilities, including ASD, they're not one size they're not one size fits all. They're all very varied. You meet one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And I think this is best shown in this kind of chart. In case of my own disabilities, people often think that the autistic spectrum is this linear representation from like not autistic to very autistic, or like you've only got certain characteristics. However, I think it's more important you can really think about the autistic spectrum in this sense. It varies from person to person and could even vary from situation to situation. So you need to understand that this is not a clear-cut example. You can't put every person into a certain box. They're all varied, and these aspects of their personality and character do change significantly. And it's also important to note that some with disabilities have come with compounding or overlapping conditions like myself, such as depression, anxiety, and the dyslexia and dyscalculia could even be thrown in there with a diagnosis of ASD and ADHD. So I think it's really important that just because someone may seem normal or okay on the surface, it doesn't mean that they're facing daily hardships that others might not comprehend. So there are these invisible disabilities, and we need to be mindful and very vigilant of that when we're talking about this. So it's really crucial that we approach these issues of each individual's experience with mindfulness and vigilance. And as host of this event and chair of the NGDP Disability Inclusion Network, I stand before you with the hope that we can all work together to create a supportive and inclusive community. So let us celebrate Disability Pride Month by embracing diversity and empowering individuals with disabilities. Let's build a future that values and celebrates every unique journey, and let us strive for a compassionate, empathetic, and understanding society that values the contributions of every individual, regardless of their disabilities. And together, we can rewrite the narrative, and we can create an inclusive society where everyone feels valued, empowered, and able to thrive. And I'd really thank you for being part of this event. And I invite each and every one of you to join us in this to really support our cause. And I really hope we can continue to build a future that values and celebrates every unique journey. And I really thank you all for listening. And I'd like to take any questions now. If anyone has any questions, you feel free to raise a hand or go ahead, Nash.
Hi, Kieran. Firstly, just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. It was really powerful to hear that from your lived experience, and it just sort of really writes home how important it is, what you're doing is, and just really appreciate hearing that from you. Um, my question is just more around your experiences sort of working within uh local government roles, and how have you found that, has the support been there for you, or has it been a bit lacking? And just personally, from I know from my council, I know that they're only just starting a disability inclusion network. I think literally just recently, which surprised me really, because I just thought, I'm wondering why it's taken so long for them to get to that stage.
Yeah, thanks, Nash. And yeah, I honestly, I kind of knew I had to sort of went a bit deep, I have to admit, but I felt like it kind of had to be said because I think the real weight of it is about the true gravity of the process it took for me to get here. In terms of my experience within local government, it kind of varies. So within the combined authority, there is a disability diversity network actually chaired by Mark as well. So that is a extremely good group to go to, because it's very good to have those like-minded people in that capacity. However, from my experience of getting the right level of support when I need it, I would probably say not as good as I'd hoped. My line manager didn't actually know what access to work was, and also kind of when trying to get reasonable adjustments for my workload, the onus was put on me to say what I needed, which is fine, but I was well aware that if you have someone who's either new to their diagnosis or isn't fully aware of what reasonable adjustments are available, or not even fully aware of what reasonable adjustments like they might need in terms of how to facilitate that, that was problematic, because you then there was no, there were not well, I wasn't presented with any examples. So like, well, what do you want, what do you need? And I was like, well, what can you offer? And then went back and forth until basically nothing's happened. So that's probably a large part of what I'm here for, but hopefully I think there is some movement in regards to that and the communication around that, but that's a large part of why I'm putting in this event today as well. But thank you very much for the question. Are there any more? Feel free to raise a hand if you need to be, but there's also will be opportunities for wider questions later on as well. All good. Okay, so in that case, just because that was a little bit dark and a bit of a morbid one, people could just take a 5-minute break whilst we kind of just get prepped for Mark's stuff. If anyone wants to get a cup of tea or anything, because it's obviously that was a bit intense. So if we wanted to, if we come back at 12:10, that's absolutely fine, and then we'll be able to go into our next session. So thanks very much once again, and then we'll catch you in around 5-ish minutes. So welcome back. I'm not sure if everyone is back or not, but it is 10 past and still got quite a lot to make our way through. So I guess we'll move on to kind of our next session. Really excited to kind of have Mark here with us today. As I said, I know him through being part of the Disability Diversity Network at the WMCA, but he's also a really great advocate for disability inclusion kind of regionally and on a wider scale. But I'll kind of let Mark go through all of his kind of impressive achievements along the way, and will be giving a really interesting talk around disability policy. So yeah, take it away, Mark.
Excellent, thank you. I think I should now have control. So
yeah,
we'll soon find out whether I have or not. Yeah, there we go. Can everyone see the slides change? Fantastic. Okay, so as Kieran said, my name's Mark Fosbrook. I am a white, middle-aged male with a shaved head, and I'm wearing a black t-shirt and have my lovely office pod and bike in the background behind me. I was born with my disability, so I'm a double baloney amputee and have congenital deformities to my hands. So basically have 2 fingers on each hand. And I know you've obviously heard a lot of stories, well, Kieran's impressive story today, and thank you, Kieran, for being so open and sharing. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about mine, but yes, have been fortunate enough to represent my country in 3 sports, have worked alongside that the whole time, very much throughout my career focused on improving opportunities for disabled people, and actually received my honorary doctorate as part of my contribution to sport and getting disabled people to be more physically active. But what I wanted to do was to spend a little bit of time looking at some sort of other areas around disability. So I know Kieran sort of gave a really brief intro into disability, and obviously the Equality Act definition of disability is a physical or mental impairment or long-term health condition that has a substantial and long-term negative impact on your ability to do normal daily activities. Sounds very medical model, and as Kieran said, I'm based here at the West Midlands Combined Authority, and we very much use the social model of disability, which is that people are disabled by barriers in society, not by their impairment or difference. And barriers can be physical, can be design, or the attitudes of people. And that's very much where we wanted to look at today. And I wanted to take this opportunity to get you thinking a little bit differently about disability. So as we heard from Kieran, he explained that he was born with his impairment, as was I, and that is very much seen as that permanent disability. You know, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and suddenly have grown feet. I think that would be quite freaky if I did, but it's something that's always going to be with me. And that's where most people tend to look at when we think about disability. We've then got temporary, and temporary could be the amount of times I speak to people and they tell me, oh, I know what it's like to be disabled. I had a period of time where I spent a number of months in a wheelchair, or I had to use walking aids, etc. And that gives you that bit of insight and understanding, but it's very much that temporary scenario in that you're not always going to have that condition impairment, and that you will ultimately end up not having that. And then the last one is situational, and this is one that a lot of people don't even really think about. So if you're carrying a big box, say you're in the office, and you need to carry a big box out to your car, and you get to a door and you can't open the door because you're carrying this big box in both hands. You have now become disabled by that situation. So by the fact that you can no longer open that door, you have been disabled by the environment around you and the environment you are in. When you start to look at disability in this broader context of permanent, temporary, and situational, you start to realize that at any moment in time, any one of us can be disabled by society, by attitudes, by the environment around us. And when you start to think like that, it starts to make you feel, well, actually, we need to be making sure we're doing something about that. So, hopefully, in the West Midlands Combined Authority, that's where we've started on that journey, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. Kieran highlighted that there are quite a few challenges, and to be honest, could probably list challenges for hours on end. But I'll just highlight a few. So almost half of all people in poverty in the UK are either disabled or live with a disabled person. On average, disabled people have additional costs of £975 per month, and that equates to £11,700 a year. And we wonder why so many disabled people are in poverty if they're facing those additional costs and they have to find that additional £11,000 a year. You know, if I suddenly took 11 grand out of your pockets, I think, you know, any of us would start to struggle. Disabled. So I've got some stats here around the West Midlands, but it is very a similar picture across the country. But in the West Midlands, we know disabled people are paid the lowest in the country. We know we have the third largest pay gap, but that pay gap is representative across the whole of the country. And the disabled people, particularly in the West Midlands, are 3 times as likely not to have the appropriate skills. But again, that is fairly reflective across the whole of the country as well. So it sounds quite a bad picture, but it is not all doom and gloom. There is this thing called the purple pound. So the purple pound is really looking at the spending power that disabled people have. In the bottom right-hand corner of this infographic, it shows that the spending power of disabled people and their households is £274 billion a year. So when we start to look at it in that context, And I know through the conversations I've been having, as soon as I move the conversation away from this being the moral thing to do or the right thing to do, and moving to it actually just makes good economic sense, and started to talk about these sorts of figures, obviously, as you can imagine, a lot of heads started turning and thinking, oh, how can we maximise some of these opportunities? There are loads of other stats on there, and as Kieran said, these slides will go around. But I wanted just to highlight that actually disabled people and supporting and improving opportunities for disabled people isn't just about the right thing to do. It's actually really good business sense because it provides a greater diversity of thought. You know, from Kieran's input this morning, hopefully it's given you a bit of reflection and thought and thinking in a slightly different way, and hopefully as we go through these slides you'll start to think a bit differently. But equally, it's also got a really good economic impact as well. So in the West Midlands, we want to become an exemplar region for disabled people. I've been brought in to develop a framework that's looking at having a disability task force that will have various leaders from across the region, as well as disabled professionals who are experts in particular areas of work. We're also looking at a disability needs assessment that will bring together the quantitative data that's out there, which we know becomes quite patchy when you start to break it down to a regional or local level, and putting that alongside the real life context, the qualitative information of our disabled citizens. And we'll gather that information through the development of a citizens network and panel, which will really create the West Midlands to be that area that has that more robust and credible understanding of disabled people than anywhere in the country. With the previous piece of work that I worked on, focusing on encouraging disabled people to be physically active, our pilot network had a potential reach to 21,000 disabled people. So you can start to see the size and scale that we're talking about, and wanting to really make this something that is credible and robust, but has a voice and a platform into decision makers and leaders. As well as that, we then want to look to develop a regional strategy and to really be that exemplar, become that exemplar region eventually, that we can share this framework across the country and other people can replicate it and learn from it, and hopefully build their own level of understanding about the localities as well. So that's where we want to get to. Obviously, as you can imagine, it's quite a lot of hard work, and we face quite a lot of challenge, because actually, if you look at, you know, leaders that are in position, they've got there because they fit in the system that suits them and is suitable for them. So why the need to change it? And that's why we've developed this model, which is our SOS model. And this is that every one of us has a part to play in reducing the root causes of inequality and championing change. And we look at three key areas, and I use the analogy of the Titanic for this. So if you imagine our services, so they're the deck chairs on the deck of the Titanic. And we do a pretty good job of moving the deck chairs around to keep the people on board the Titanic happy. We add new services, we develop opportunities, we hopefully learn from mistakes and build new, better opportunities, offers, projects, etc. However, the problem with that is the organisation or the systems, and that's a system or multiple systems that are failing disabled people, and that's the Titanic itself. The Titanic has got a massive hole in the side of it, and it's slowly sinking and failing disabled people. And actually, you know, one of the problems with the Titanic, there wasn't enough life rafts. And if we continue to sink, then there's a lot of disabled people that are going to be struggling because they won't be able to all get on that lifeboat and survive. And then the third area is society, and that's the iceberg. That's the attitudes and behaviours of people. And we need to look at how we move those attitudes and behaviours further away from the system, and how we then look to mount or remove those attitudes and behaviours altogether. Now, it's really important that we look at all three of those at the same time, because if you only look at one, you implement better services, you'll still have a system and society that will impact on it. If you only look at the system and you change the system, because systems by their nature can be redesigned, and you rebuild a new ship, you'll have poor services and you'll still have those attitudes and behaviours to put another hole in the system. Or if you only look at society, again, you'll have a system and services that fail. So we need to look at all three at the same time. And that's what I want to really talk to you about today, is to start to get you thinking about how you can look at each of those. So from a services point of view, is think about your audience first. Quite often when we see projects, proposals, ideas put together, we very much look at that and we've got a great idea. Let's go and build this project. And then we get through the proposal form, and probably within each of your local authorities, whatever document you use, you'll work through it all, you get to the bottom, and that's where you then add the information around the impact, the equality impact assessment, the impact on inclusive growth, etc. We need to put that at the top. We need to understand what our services and who they're trying to appeal to. And if we know that, then we can obviously make that more inclusive. We need to think about choice. So there are some disabled people that will really want a dedicated opportunity, a dedicated service, and there are others that will just want to, or maybe won't even consider themselves to be disabled, that just want to be part of any offer or any service. And I think quite often disability gets lumped into this big one homogenous group, and we're not. Everyone has difference. Everyone, as Kieran said, you meet one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And that's the same across every impairment, every disability. So how can we think about that? We need to think about how we can design our ableism. Now, ableism has become so ingrained in our everyday wording of society that quite often our services, our projects, our policies all have ableist words in there or focus in there. So think about the terminology and wording you're using. Think about if you were to take a word out and put that in a racial context or in a gender-based context, would you feel as comfortable? Would you feel happy in that wording? And if it makes you feel uneasy and uncomfortable, then that wording probably isn't right, and it's probably a bit on the ableist side. And even things like it's fallen on deaf ears or turning a blind eye, phrases which are used so commonly out in society, actually when you start to break it down and look at it and the impact that it can have on those impairment groups, actually really can start to be significant. And then don't forget your marketing and communications when you're advertising your services. You know, think about your audience, think about how you're going to put it forward. Have you got in a sort of a nice, easy, plain English format? Have you considered alternative text on your images, for example? There's lots of different things that you can do to make your offer and your promotion more accessible, more inclusive, more engaging, without necessarily badging it up as a disability offer or a disability element. You know, just by saying you've considered the needs of, you know, there's an accessible change in places facility, or it's level access, or there's a space for a guide dog to spend in a spending area. So there's a whole range of different elements that you can add in to show that you've thought about an inclusive element. Then moving on to organisation. So I would like you to sort of go and check all your policies and processes are anti-ableist. So think about that wording, think about that terminology, and you may be there thinking, well, I'm just on a graduate programme. This is sort of way above my pay grade, and that there are many people further up that should be doing that. But as I said, we all have a part to play in helping to call out and shape what we do within our organisations. And, you know, we will see that there's regular training put on, and that could be okay. You know, training is good. We learn from that, but we need to think about changing the culture and behaviours of individuals as well. And as Kieran said, you know, he's come across employers who haven't quite understood or supported his needs. So we can't assume that everybody is there, is ready to help, and is supported. And you can play a real key part in helping to be an ally and bring around some of that change. And lead by example. Yes, we want all of our leaders of our organisations to be driving that change, but sometimes they'll need that support and education from you, from others within the organisation. And I use this idea of a Petri dish. So in the Petri dish, the image on the right, you can see that there are little dots surrounded by a big ring in the Petri dish, and that's penicillin. And when you basically throw penicillin into a Petri dish, it creates this ring around itself where it's protected. And that's very similar to our disability. If we, each one of us, as a disabled person or as an active ally, takes that proactive stand and influences others within their organisation, you will have that ring around you, and you will hopefully get others to have that ring of allyship around them as well. The more people you get to have their own ring and allyship around them, eventually those rings will all touch each other and take over the whole entire dish. And that's when you'll get that change of behaviour, that change of attitude within your organisation. So going back to that thought of, well, I'm just on the graduate programme, I can't make a difference. You can, absolutely you can. Each and every one of us can. And actually, we're probably the ones that are better suited to helping bring around change, because we want to see things different. We're not in a position where it's always been this way, so why do we need to do it different? And then the last one is society. So help to create a workforce that is prepared to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. You know, have those conversations back in your working area, talking about hopefully how great you found today, how much you've learned, and how it's important to call out or call in when you hear ableist terminology or wording. And it's not about getting people in trouble. It's not about trying to I quite often get called disability police when I first started in my roles. And I was like, I'm not here as disability police. I'm here to help you learn. If you've never done anything around a more inclusive environment, that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. But where we move forward now and work together, I'm here to help you learn and help you get better and help you support you. Will I always get it right? No, of course not. You know, people say I'm this sort of disability expert. I'm definitely not an expert. I'm an expert of my own lived experience, and I've been fortunate enough to have many conversations with many different people with many different impairments and situations. And if I can help them have a voice, I'd much rather them be there talking than myself. But where they don't have a voice, I can start to steer the conversation in a way that helps them get that voice and that position. It's about changing those behaviours and attitudes. And if we want to get better externally, and as you know, if you're all in sort of various different authorities, you know, there'll be various plans that they've got in place to say, actually, we want to drive forward and reduce health inequalities for disabled people, or for, you know, transgender individuals, or whatever protected characteristic group your particular authority is leading on. But we're only going to really change that external picture if you look at the internal structures. and how you can play a part in helping to change that. As I said, you can make a difference, and encourage that supportive environment that embraces that difference, empowers people to bring their full self to work. As Kieran said, it can be exhausting by not being able to be your true self and having to hide or mask. And actually, when you are your full self, it brings so much more diversity of thought and learning to the organisation. And if there is a staff network, then look to join it. Again, whether you're a disabled person yourself or an ally, I know our network, as Kieran said, I chair our network, and that is open to disabled people, people with long-term health conditions, to carers and people with caring responsibilities, but actually to allies. So pretty much anyone in the organisation, because we can't do it alone. We need the support of everyone to come on this journey with us. So with that in mind, it's time for you to answer that SOS call, and hopefully you've had a nice time listening to me. And again, if you've got any questions, I'll hopefully try and answer them for you.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. I think that was really insightful and really interesting. And yeah, I think first of all, a bit of a round of applause for Mark, please, because I think that's been really insightful. So yeah, thanks very much for that. Yeah, please feel free to ask any questions. But there is going to be a wider Q&A/discussion bit after this as well. But please feel free to, if you have anything specifically for Mark, go ahead. Go on, Aisha.
Yeah, so my question is, like, obviously we can make a change organisation by organisation, but do you think it needs more of a regional or a national standpoint as well?
Absolutely. I mean, when we started to explore the regional ambition, some of that had come out from, I suppose, the initial ruling that the national strategy for disabled people had been deemed unlawful due to lack of adequate consultation. And that's where we started to use the work that we'd built around how we can make the region better for engaging disabled people to be active, and use some of that framework and learning to build the regional framework, because we know actually, in terms of the disability needs assessment, for example, the collation of data is really sketchy when you get to a regional or local level. So how can we at a regional context really start to build on that and develop and plug some of those gaps? And we know most local authorities don't necessarily have the full capacity to be able to focus on specific impairments or specific areas of need. So as a combined authority, that's what we want to look to do. But equally, this framework is there to hopefully help, whether you're a local authority, a regional authority, or even government, national central government, is we want this to be a potential framework and solution that people can look at and go, well, actually, fundamental areas of this sort of framework is having that citizen's voice in a robust and credible way that can influence and change policy decision making. I suppose it comes around that old sort of saying of nothing about us without us. And yes, the national strategy decision has now been reversed. So the national strategy can now still drive forward. But my concern around that at the moment is that there are a lot of disabled people out there that don't feel that strategy belongs to them. They don't feel that they've had an adequate say in how that's shaped or how that's going to be shaped. So if we can do our part at a local or regional level and then provide that context in a far more robust way, then that's a good thing in my eyes.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any? Oh, there we go. Go ahead, Ross.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to start by thanking you both for kind of for the presentation today. It's been really fascinating. I just want to ask, because of kind of the theme which is going to be kept coming up about the kind of the range of people who are dealing with disabilities, and certainly kind of in my kind of area of work, which is housing. You know, homelessness is really important kind of support needs of disabilities. But I mean, what are the kind of the advice you give, the best ways to kind of really kind of bring the variety of different disabled people on side? Because again, as you say, like you meet one disabled people, you met one disabled person, right? There's kind of a whole range of different kind of characteristics and personalities and mental and physical disabilities that if we do our kind of we attempt to build inclusive services, you know, we can't, you know, it's almost impossible to fit everyone in by that definition. So what some advice you give to kind of square that circle then when we're building inclusive services? I hope my question makes sense.
Oh, I think it does. I think from a how you engage, you know, you're never going to please everybody all the time. You know, the more people that you can get, the better spectrum of understanding and thought you can get. You know, remembering that actually most disabled people have maybe more than one impairment, and that is not just their only defining characteristic. So when you start to look at intersectionality, that adds in multiple levels of deprivation as well. So it is a challenge, and it is something that, you know, I don't think unless we went out to every single individual and said, right, what can we do specifically for you? But what you can do in sort of, you know, looking from housing is change some of those fundamental challenges and barriers that are in the way. So, you know, if you look at, you know, how people are treated at the moment, maybe blind and partially sighted people, how they're treated by private landlords with regards to having a guide dog, or how there aren't enough accessible homes, or how actually those homes are advertised, both in terms of estate agents, but also within the stock that's held by local authorities. It's not really clear on how appropriate or suitable each facility or each house is. As well as that is, as you get to new builds, is creating buildings in a way that can be adapted and changed. There is not a blueprint of this is the perfect building for everyone, because if you were to say, right, you know, as a wheelchair user, I need to have a parking space right outside the front of my house. It needs to be nice, open and easy for me to get into. And then inside the home, I need, you know, nice, big, open space for me to be able to get around. But then if that house is there then for maybe a family who's got a child with autism, they actually want to have some smaller spaces so that actually there isn't that big massive noise inside the home, and there are quieter areas so that that individual hasn't got sensory overload. And actually, you know, when you get out the front door, they want it to be fenced off and gated so that that child can't just suddenly bolt out into the road, as an example. So it needs to be thinking about design in a more adaptable way, and not just going, well, this is one size, this fits all. You know, we'll make our doors a bit wider, we'll put a ramp up to the door, we'll put our light switches at a certain height, tick the box, we've done, because we know that's not the answer. So hopefully that's helped answer some of that, and got you thinking a bit about it. But it's I suppose it's unpicking each theme in each area, which is what we want to do, is think about where all those individual development touch points or decision touch points are. So you break down every single component, look at where all those decisions are made, either by an individual, by a developer, by an authority, etc., and then look at how you make those better and bring them all back together in one hopefully exemplar way. But you know, as I said, our idea and ambition is to be that exemplar, but first we've just got to get it right for disabled people, and that's probably the starting point.
That's really great. And if there's any more questions, I'm sure you can either post them in the chat, or I can, try and get Mark to or myself to give some answers to it. I'm just being wary of time. We might just need to move on to the why. No, it's not you, Mark. It's probably I've overrun a bit as well. But in terms of kind of a wider kind of discussion piece, obviously, as you've kind of heard, there's been a lot of discussions about what we can do with our own capacity on the NGDP, but also in regards to what our placement councils are to ensure that they're inclusive, but also to ensure people like myself or other people with disabilities on the NGDP are adequately supported throughout their time on their placement, because it by averages, so there's 212 of us on the NGDP, so go by law of averages, let's say 10%, so 20 people would probably have some form of a disability. Coming cohort 25, that's another 20, so that's 40 people who are in councils across the UK, and we cannot confirm or deny that they're truly getting that level of support they need. So what AbilityNet, an organisation, have put up is something I thought was quite interesting, and I'd actually quite like for all of us on this call to try and take away and reflect on our own councils in this, which is about the four level journey of a disability inclusive workplace. So level one of this is it uses the acronym of kind of a growing tree. So level one for this would be an acorn, which is often the starting place, which is where the disability often feels quite invisible within the organization's culture, and they might not purposely but more mistakenly consider it doesn't have a problem with any of their disabled staff or customers, or any of the processes that they have in place, thinking they're fine. But this also means they might not put this right processes in place that could adequately support a disabled person, and they would feel like they would just handle this situation when it kind of crops up. But this really presents a very high risk for any organization at this stage, because there's probably very likely disabled individuals within the organization who are already being excluded, disadvantaged, or struggling, because of this lack of a well-established framework, as Mark's touched upon before, in terms of the systems and the organization itself. Then level two of this kind of stage would be at the seedling stage. So the organization at this stage would have some form of appreciation for disabled people, that they exist within the organization, but the onus often remains on them to request an advocate for any specific adjustments in that sense. And at this kind of level, they might not feel comfortable, disabled people might feel comfortable requesting support or adjustments in case they're declined, or it's seen as unreasonable, or they're just not able to get hold of that. On the organisation side, this is going to incur probably a lot more effort and difficulty in dealing with each request, because it's doing it by a case-by-case basis, instead of having an established framework and system in place. They can help get this and streamline this process to ensure that people are adequately supported with ease, basically. And then this third stage would more be the sapling stage. So this is like one of the biggest steps up from the seedling stage. This is where they've taken a much more structured and strategic approach to anticipate and offer the adjustments to people in need of it. They're much more like employees are much more likely to feel much more confident to access support and adjustments without any concern about any judgment or difficulties or prejudice around that. But they are still expected to share that information about their disability, which might leave some people not to disclose because they don't feel comfortable talking about their disability, because a subconscious feeling of they're going to be judged or going to face some comeback, or some things will come back against them because they've disclosed, oh, I might have this, I might have that, and that's something that they don't want to kind of cause that issue for themselves, that kind of problematic kind of interactions. And obviously this end goal is really stage 4, which is the oak tree. So this is the real end goal for most organizations in terms of a workplace. I don't know why the tree is slightly blocking one of the words, but this is the realization to making adjustments for working practices are providing choices to customers' benefit. They're basically very much in mind about adjustments for people. You feel comfortable about providing that information, and very confident in an inclusive environment. However, it's very important to note that this stage of the oak tree is not the end goal. You don't just stop there, because like a tree, it carries on growing. So you can continue to develop and shape out these processes, but also because of disabilities being so varied and individualized, that you'll have to grow and adapt to other people's varying needs as the organization grows, but also the practices and the structures in place continue to develop as well. So that is something that we all would, I would think we'd all want to aspire to within our own councils. And that means, you know, demonstrating this real openness and to be able to discuss the requirements you need, and maybe putting things in place that might not have always been in place previously, but there is an ease and willingness to do so on the organisation side. So coming back to this, I think that's where I wouldn't say it's homework necessarily, but I think it's very important, I think, on our side that as we're based in local authorities across the UK, we're in a very unique position where there can be a very very good feedback loop. As in, what are our councils doing, which councils are doing well, which ones do we think are at, you know, which stage do we think our councils are at? Are we at Oak Tree? Are you at Acorn? Either's fine, but I think it's very important for all of us to maybe go back and reflect on this. The idea would be that there is going to be another shorter event allowing for people to be able to relay back what they found, but this kind of stuff would be circulated towards the in an email at the end of the session. But these are kind of some of these key questions that I think, where, you know, I'd like for all of us to kind of take away and consider when we're thinking about what our, you know, is our organizations up to scratch, basically. You know, how good are they at driving inclusion? Is there anything that really could be improved? What areas of disability policy might be lacking in the council area or region? You know, is there, as Mark's outlined, is there potential language uses that's ableist? Are people with that lived experience and with, from, you know, varying protected characteristics, are they involved within the decision making or policy shaping process? Is it truly inclusive in that sense? In our sense on the NGDP, do our managers have a good level of knowledge and awareness about disability and how it might impact the individual, especially when you consider the constant new research that comes out about how various disabilities impact the individual? And also, are the colleagues, aside from the managers, given, you know, is a colleague within it you know, that has a disability, do you know if they're struggling? Are they getting that level of support they need from their line managers, or are they just masking, trying to sort of smile their way through the day? And do you know if they've got the right reasonable adjustments? And do you know if they have been through a lot of struggle to get through that stage? These are all things that are not easy to notice, but we have to bear in mind going forwards. Like, local governments are meant to be exemplars for the region and they're exemplars for public behaviour. But I think we can probably, you know, by reading these questions, I wouldn't be, you know, I'm sure there are some aspects of this that could be improved across the board. And even in my own capacity, I know there's things that I could improve in terms of my delivery or presentation, but also just my own perhaps misconceptions or subconscious bias around disability. It's always a learning process and there's never an end point. And that's where we need to consider that this is always something that will always take shape and it's always evolving. And we need to ensure that our systems within our councils and also wider society is kind of matches that pace of change, because things always do keep changing. So that's where I would like to have this level of feedback loop in between people who on this call, but also people are able to share this kind of information with other people. I hope you've actually enjoyed it enough to be able to want to share it. But that's where I'd really want to go with this, because I think we have a duty. Yes, we're grads, but as Mark says, we are able to drive change, and we have to, because people aren't. We're not going to get anywhere otherwise. You know, we have to be able to carry this banner and bang the drum and make noise about it until there is that level of interest, and people need to understand that this is an area that we are neglecting. And also, very importantly, obviously you can relay back to me. I'll be sharing the contact information shortly. But if you are a graduate on the NGDP with a disability and you've had moments that you don't feel like you're being supported correctly, or you don't know what support is available to you, please let us know. I've been put in touch with some people on the LGA and NGDP team who've basically said we will try and, you know, in those kinds of circumstances, we will try and relay back and try and figure out what's going on there. And I think that's what's most important, is that I'm well aware that there are probably people on the NGDP who probably are struggling and do have a disability and aren't getting that support, and that's largely why I'm here. I want to hear your issues, but I want to also try and find a way to help you, because that's you know, that's not right. The NGDP has a duty of care, the LGA has a duty of care, and so do our councils. With this being some people's jobs straight out of university, this is a major transition, and people need that support and they need that guidance. So if they're not getting that, we need to do something about it. You know, we're looking out for our peers. We're all in this together in this sense, and I think that's what the kind of biggest message is about this. So as I said, I'll be sharing some of this information about what we can, so you can take this away and reflect on your own councils, and maybe you'll do some of your own learning alongside it. And there's some really good links on throughout these slides. But also, most importantly, if you've really enjoyed this event and you've got any queries or want to learn more, please join the network. We're welcome to all people of, you know, all disabilities or long-term health conditions or mental health problems, but also again to kind of active allies or people who just are aware of these kind of issues. So at the moment, the steering group is myself as chair, Ollie as vice chair, and Sophie recently coming in as our events engagement lead. We're hoping to put more of these events on as we go on down the line, but very welcome to have new people in and do some joint network events as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And I also just want to say thank you very much for attending. Even if you've come in as just kind of not really sure what to expect, or you've come in as a very knowledgeable person around these kind of areas, the fact that you're here shows is the first step, and it's the first step for us actually achieving a real inclusive environment, not only on the NGDP but also as a society as a whole. I think there's, as Mark's highlighted, there are areas of policy and that are lacking, and are probably lacking in some of our council areas. But I really think I just like to thank you all for coming, and I think it's a really good way to round off Disability Pride Month, because it's been such a really insightful talk, and really glad that, you know, so many people have actually managed to attend, considering this was put together so last minute basically. And also I just want to say probably a big round of applause for Mark as well, because I think his talk was really insightful and really really engaging. Yeah, you can all get in touch. So the email is on screen, disabilitynetwork.ngdp@gmail.com, and then our link, we've put up a LinkedIn recently, but once I share the slides, you will also be to go via the link. And as I said, there'll be a kind of, the idea is that there's going to be a kind of shorter feedback session in regards to the kind of reflections on your own placement councils at a later point. But yeah, that will probably come at a later point when I've probably got a bit more sleep. But if anyone kind of has any questions or like any queries, like please feel free, any last minute questions, please feel free to go ahead. Otherwise I will I'll close up the event. But if you have any last minute questions or comments, please go ahead. No, I think we're all good there. So yeah, thank you all very much, and it's been a really great event, and I really thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you all at future events. And yeah, if anyone has any later queries that kind of come to mind later in the day, just feel free to drop me an email or get in touch. So thank you all very much, and thank you again, Mark, and I'll see you all soon. Take care.
Thanks, Kieran. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
both.
very much.
Very insightful.
Cheers.
Take care.